This is Talking Stations, a show about EVE Online. I'm your host, Artemis Albosa. Joining me today, as usual, we have Gregor and Musu.
Good evening.
And real quick at the top, we do have a pretty loaded show today, so I'll keep this short, but we have a little bit of a housekeeping announcement to make. And if you are an audio listener on the podcast, you may have already realized something is very strange today. You are hearing an episode of our Newsday, so one of the shows that we do during the week. This is not a Sunday show, which is normally the only thing that we push out to the podcast feed. But we've been putting in a lot of work. We've bumped up our staff for who's working on the shows that happen during the week. Really increased the production quality as well as the number and amount of guests and variety of guests that we've been able to get. And so we feel like that it's about time to get these shows out to the podcast, in addition to the usual twitch.tv/talkingstations and youtube.com/c/talkingstations. So if you're interested in checking out the show, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can follow us on Twitch. One note on YouTube, we had some confusion last week with our YouTube shows. YouTube is a bit of a strange platform where even if you subscribe to a channel saying, yes, I would like to see more from this person, YouTube just doesn't care. Unless you hit the notification bell and select all notifications, YouTube will decide to show you the content sometimes, and if not enough other people click on it, then it won't even bother showing it to you. So a fantastic example of this would be Alliance Tournament content or other niche content that there are plenty of our listeners who would love to hear about it, but because it's a smaller portion of the EVE community, those videos don't do as well. YouTube doesn't show it to everyone, so if you just want to make sure you don't miss any shows, especially the ones about the more niche topics, make sure you're hitting the notification bell or just go to our channel directly. That'll get that sorted. Alright, well let's talk about the news for today. And boy, do we have a lot of it. The title for today's episode, at least the working title, is the whales are getting smarter and the whales are working harder. And that's because we've got a lot of whaling stuff to talk about, as well as some new tools available. But before we get into that, I do want to give some updates regarding the ongoing narratives of the two wars and the different quadrants of EVE Online. And to do that, we'll kick things off by looking at Vindictive. We talked about them a little bit last week because they had a massive drop. They lost about a third of their members. And since then, they went almost down to nothing. They lost a large number of corporations and members again, but then they've since rebounded to around half of their former member numbers. Vindictive, if you're unfamiliar, are members of the PIBC Coalition, Pan-Intergalactic Business Community Coalition, who live in the southeastern quadrant of the map and sort of in the south. Vindictive themselves, they live in Peregrine Sol, which we'll talk a little bit about more later, but it's on the map basically directly south in between Period Bases, which belongs to the Imperium, and Esoteria, which belongs to Army of Mangoes, also a member of PIBC.
Isn't that the furthest south region of the entire New Eden cluster?
You know, I'm not too sure, geography speaking. Looking at the map as it shows on Dotland, there's also Faith Abalis, which might be in the running for furthest south, but it is most certainly a very remote location. And I think that's why sort of these shenanigans have been occurring within Vindictive, where they're losing corps and regaining the corps, and while their coalition is actively at war, but even still nothing has happened to their space. They're just very remotely situated, and again, right between Period Basis, which belongs to the Imperium, and Esoteria, which belongs to Army of Mangoes. So they sort of have a buffer on each side from anybody who wants to come in and attack them, presuming they're on friendly terms with the Imperium. So they can get away with restructuring or shuffling things around or doing whatever it is that they need to do without running much of a risk of putting their space at risk. And speaking of space, let's go ahead and just check in at the SOV map. So last week, when we were looking at what was going on, we started to see Imensi, which was a hotbed for this conflict, quieting down, and that trend has been continuing. If you look at TCUs, it is very much stabilized. iHubs, they're beginning to just slowly fill in from where they were destroyed during the war. If you're looking at dotland, you see this green haze. That's an incursion. That's not any structures being reinforced. There are still, once again, no Sov timers active in Amencia at the time of recording. So it very much seems like Dreadbomb and the rest of Wrecking Crew and PIBC are happy to cede that territory to members of Fire Coalition. Heading on over to the other hotbed, which we looked at last week, Tenerifis, that is still active, especially on the couple of constellations directly adjacent to Catch, which is the home region for Wrecking Crew and Dreadbomb, or a home region for them at least. You're seeing timers being spawned, and things are a bit weird. We still have the funky situation where if you look at this map from the TCU perspective, so seeing who owns the TCUs, who's planted their flag, it looks like it's mostly owned by Army of Mangoes, Dreadbomb, like that side of this war. But then if you flip over to iHubs, suddenly that changes entirely, and it looks like it's owned mostly by Fire Coalition. So that's a bit of a nuance there. I guess everybody realizes that TCUs aren't particularly important when it comes to a long-scale battle, and so they're not worth wasting the morale or the time or the energy to try and take those timers. I did want to point out real quickly, one small development in this war is happening down in Faithabalis. So at the very bottom of Faithabalis, which the region specifically is adjacent to Tenerifis, there's a connection there, but there's also a connection to Omist and Esoteria. So it's sort of sandwiched right in between where AOM live in Esoteria, but then AOM also has holdings over in Omist. So there's lots of travel happening in between there by that group. And Faithabalis itself is owned by members of Fire Coalition. So you can imagine, or at least I would imagine, this would be a ripe place for conflict to occur. And sure enough, on the pipe connecting Esoteria and Omist, those two Army of Mangoes territories, we're beginning to see quite a few timers heating up. I haven't seen anything explode or escalate out of hand, so to speak. So these might very well be just matters of convenience. People were passing through, saw some vulnerable timers, thought, I'm going to contribute to the war effort, and took on them, or reinforced them. But we'll keep an eye on it, see if this begins to flare up further down south with AOM. It would put Wrecking Crew and Dreadbomb in an interesting situation, because they'd have to come through Catch, through Impasse, which belongs to Red Menace Coalition, if memory serves, and then into Faithabalis. But we'll keep an eye on it, and we'll keep you informed. Shifting our focus up to Pureblind, which was the other area up in the northwestern quadrant of the map, we have Brave, who have very much settled in and stabilized in their new home in the constellation in the bottom left, or excuse me, the bottom right of this map. So they took the constellation that used to belong to Flying Dangerous, and they are just settling in, putting up infrastructure, and dealing with all of the harassment they see. One thing I want to show you real quick is if we look at ships killed last 24 hours, you can see that QTech 5, which is their staging system, has very much become the hotbed of activity within the entire region. With 181 ships killed just in the last 24 hours, the next closest system is also just adjacent to their space. It's BDV3, which is the border between where Banderlogs, which is another large independent alliance in Pureblind, they are adjacent to the space for Brave and their constellation. So that's an interesting place for gate camps to happen potentially, and other things in the map in that regard. So there's some stabilization happening there. I made a prediction. I can't remember which show it was on, but I made a prediction previously that if I were to bet in a few months what the Pureblind map would look like, I would imagine that Banderlog's space, some if not all of it, belongs to Brave. And that's purely based on the size of the alliance of Brave Collective. I don't think they would be able to sustain themselves with only a single constellation. So I'm expecting them to move forward and push into taking out Banderlog's base because they have a bit of a precarious relationship with Toilet Paper and Quote Alliance and Volta, members of the Greater Trash Coalition. I don't think they'd want to push those buttons and try and take the space right adjacent to the high sec entrance. So that's my prediction. We'll have to see what happens. What do you think, Grigorin?
Yeah, I thought Banderlogs would be the one they'd be fighting most.
Indeed. We'll keep an eye on it. There's definitely a lot of fighting happening in Pureblind. There's a lot of destruction occurring. It's just not manifesting itself in terms of sovereignty structures. And you know what? One thing I didn't do when I was looking at prepping for the show is I didn't look up citadels. So let me look up citadels real quick. Goran, do you have anything you want to say about Pureblind while I do that?
I think the main reason why it's not based around sovereignty structures is because Banderlogs traditionally lives out of the NPC constellation in Pureblind. Well, one of the two NPC constellations, and there are no sovereignty structures in that constellation. And I knew that Brave would be fighting Banderlogs when they decided to move into what has long been the Banderlog staging system, 5ZXX.
Yeah, so for the viewers on Twitch and YouTube, the area of space he was referring to is this pocket right here. Who I need to look up who owns the Sov there. Mortar's Legion. Ah,
yeah,
awesome. So there are two NPC pockets in Pureblind. One belongs to Mortar's Legion, the other Sisters of Eve. And
the Sisters of Eve one, the most notable system that is usually used as a staging system for people who live out of that constellation, is XTAC 7 OMU.
Yep. And it's also very much in the center of the entire region, so a very good place to be. All right, Zkill has loaded, so I'm looking at... Oh, never mind, I needed to check the button for only losses. Give me one moment to finish looking up this intel here. While I do this, Grigorin, have you, in your new alliance, have you participated in any moon mining recently?
No, I've not done any moon mining with Pandemic Legion.
Did you do any when you were in Horde?
I did a decent amount of moon mining with Horde, not as much recently as before the War in Delve. Before the War in Delve began, I was mining a lot of moons, but I haven't done as much since. I do source a lot of the moon goo that I use from reactions, for my reactions from the Horde's official buyback, but I haven't mined a huge amount of it in a while.
Right on. I asked that because that's, if I were to bet where the destruction would continue to be happening, where those timers would be, it would be refineries on moons. Because those are not your first priority when you're invading a new region, but definitely if you want to create income for your members, if you want to create income for your alliance, the moons are going to be pretty high on the list as a good source of resources. And sure enough, looking at Zkill, we're seeing pretty consistently every day or so another Athenor that belonged to the previous inhabitants of Brave's new constellation is dying. And similar thing is happening with refineries, or excuse me, engineering complexes. So your Athenors or your Itarus and your Asbels. And citadels, curiously enough, we're seeing a lot of test citadels dying. I don't know how, when, or why. Test Alliance, please ignore, anchored a bunch of citadels in 5ZX.
Oh yeah,
but they're dead now.
That's a corporation. That's Disposable Vagrants. Diva, I think the name is Disposable Vagrants.
Disorderly Vagrants, yeah.
Those guys. They're led by Sandrin Stone, one of the main fleet commanders of Test, who, before they were in Test, they were in Brave, where he was their number 2 fleet commander, and they did not leave Brave on positive terms. And since Brave and Test stopped being blue, they they have a corp deployment going on where they've anchored a lot of troll structures.
Oh, I see. Is it reminiscent of the way in which Original Sinners left NC Dot?
No,
No?
they stayed in the war. They just were not happy with that particular alliance.
All right, fair enough. Yep, so it looks like they left back in October, and they just recently joined. No, they left in 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, now I understand. So they, during the midst of the war between all of Pappy Coalition and the Imperium, they swapped from one alliance within Pappy to another one. All right, good to know. So that was a quick update on the wars going on around EVE Online. We've still got those two major ones, but we're keeping our eyes out for more. And we're talking about the North. And adjacent to Pureblind that we've been talking about, you've got this group of systems belonging, or group of regions, belonging to Winter Coalition. You may know them better by Fraternity, which is the core alliance within the coalition. And they generally run Tribute, Veil of the Silence, and those sorts of regions up in the north. And one of them that I want to talk about, there's actually two. One is Venal, which is an NPC region belonging to Garistas. And the other one is Tenal, which is just above it. And very much adjacent, but also belonging to Fraternity, Winter Coalition et al. And the reason I want to talk about it is prior to Winter Coalition and Fraternity moving in and taking over the space up in the north, Veil of the Silent, Tribute, that sort of area, it was evacuated by its former members and was sort of a hodgepodge group of relatively independent alliances, much like Pureblind is now, except for extending into Tribute and into Veil of the Silent. And one of the alliances that lived there is called Brotherhood of Spacers, or BOSS.
Yeah, those guys, the lead corporation is Star Frontiers, which they've been in and out of test a couple of times over the years, and when they've been out of test, they've used this alliance as who they are. They most recently left test about 2 years ago and have been living in Venal since. If you're familiar with that Fitasino video that was circulated around YouTube a while ago, that was made by them during one of their previous stints out of test running the Boss Alliance.
And they do just have I don't remember that video specifically, but they have a phenomenal logo, which I appreciate personally. But the reason we want to talk about them today, and in the context of their former life in Venal and Tenal, or they specifically held Sov and Veil of the Silent, if I recall correctly, is that they gained a couple of new corporations. Yeah. And these corporations are known for a very niche style of gameplay that's seeing a resurgence as of late. Goran, you want to give us the rundown?
Well, the Whaling Corporation, the dedicated Whaling Corporation that I noticed was Blopsec. I've noticed that they also recently picked up some other corporations, like I recognized the Dark Vanguard as having previously been in Triumvirate. Blopsec is Marshy's corporation. Marshy is one of the more well-known crazy whaler types who has a million Cloaky Camper alts.
Well, had a million Cloaky Camper alts.
Yeah, well, he did before he took a break from the game. I guess he's back doing a little bit of stuff, although I don't think he's doing as much of that crazy stuff as he used to. Well, I'm not aware of him doing it yet.
I mean, I'd be very surprised. Marshy's MO, if memory serves, he had like 50 accounts or something insane like that. I think I remember him publishing a guide to how to purchase a PC, a computer, specifically designed and optimized to run 50 accounts simultaneously. It was insane. And what he would do is he would go into an entire region and Cloaky Camp every single system in that entire region and shut it down effectively, or at least put a big hamper on what could be done. And then he would coordinate with various groups. I think he did some work with Bombers Bar as well as other specific alliances or coalitions depending on the circumstances, and he would be the scout and the hunter and the tackle, and they would come in to kill stuff. But of course he's got a group of people around him who have come in to also get in on those kills.
Yeah, Blopsec had previously been in Volta with living in Thera, and then Marshy had stopped playing around the time that Volta left Thera, so Blopsec went into stasis since Volta's new content was not really their thing and their leader was inactive.
Indeed, and we had a great question in the chat, which is what is a whale and what is whaling? And I'm sorry I forgot to mention that at the top. In EVE Online, the term whale often refers to large and expensive ships that are being used specifically for PvE in most cases. So we're talking capitals, super capitals. Also, you're going to be looking at, depending on the definition, marauders and especially rorquals. So people who hunt those big targets specifically are called whalers. Those big targets themselves are called the whales. There's a story behind why that is and such, but we won't go into those gritty details. That's the definition of the term.
And, well, I'm not sure what story you have in mind, but in real life, the largest type of whale in the ocean is the rorquals, which include the blue whale and other large whales.
Yep, so that the rorqual is a whale. There's also a term within gaming itself of a whale being someone who spends a lot of money on a particular game, and so there's an aspect to which the name comes from pay-to-win players basically using their credit card to buy a shiny Titan or a capital ship, and then you're hunting those players specifically who are using their wallet to buy big expensive ships. Alrighty, and they made short work of getting to their whaling content as soon as they went and joined Boss.
Well, actually, the supers that I've seen Boss kill recently were actually before Blopsec joined the Alliance, and I didn't even see them on the kill mails. So they've been
Good point.
Yeah, they got to doing that pretty fast recently, and then Blopsec joined the Alliance, which is doing a lot of the stuff that they like doing, and well, they've never really focused a lot on holding Sov. They've held a little bit of Sov to get fights out of it, and Blopsec doesn't really want to be tied down by blues and other diplomatic agreements. So I guess they think that this is a good fit for them.
I certainly think so. It fits their MO and their style of gameplay. One thing I did want to note is, just as a curiosity of mine, the types of fleets being used to kill these super capitals was very weird to me. You may be used to seeing large balls of Kikimoras or large balls of bombers killing super capitals and type stuff like that, but in this particular case, the first one, a Hell, which died in Tenal. Again, this is belonging to Veni Vidi Vici, so they're members of Winter Coalition. Tenal is a Winter Coalition region adjacent to Venal, which is the home region of Boss. But they killed it with Blop's battleships and a lot of Widows specifically, which I found to be rather amusing. You don't often see Blop's battleships, or at least you used to not often see them. They recently got some rebalance work in terms of their bonuses as well as their tank, which made them a bit more viable. So it's great to see that groups are able to use them in reasonable numbers, less than 20 people on the kill mail, tackle and all, killing a super carrier, which is awesome.
Yeah, and another corporation which I see on this kill mail is WorldStar Hip Hop, which was, I first noticed them when they were in Parasitic Legion, which was, I guess, that was an alliance which used to exist, which had a decent amount of small gangers and was known for funding a generous SRP for small gang lost mails is one of the things that they were known for.
Interesting. Generous in the sense that even if people stupidly blinged their ships, they would still SRP it?
That's what I'm told.
Wow, okay.
And it had some pretty good, some other pretty good corps. Like probably the most famous is Higher Than Everest was in there for a while.
Right on. That corporation, what were they known for?
They were they've been in prominent small gang groups in a lot and high end PvP, fleet PvP in various alliances, including Trigger Happy, Pandemic Legion, and was it and wait, no, never mind. That's not the Higher Than Everest. That's Higher Than Everest dot. They just came up with a name that was the dot after it. So they were just trolling people with that corp name, naming it after a famous corporation.
Ah, okay. Well, good to know that we're being trolled. All right.
World Star Hip Hop, those guys, that's a corporation that I've perceived as pretty competent.
Coolio. Well, I mean, they're killing super capitals with their Blops battleships, so that's competent enough for me. Another kill that they got against Fraternity directly, this one happening in Venal, which once again, this is NPC nullsec, so I'm not entirely certain what the Nyx was doing there at the time, perhaps traveling, perhaps this looks like a gank fit actually.
Yeah,
was it trying to gank something?
That's what I was about to say. That looks like that I don't know, but that's what it looks like to me. The hell looks like a purely ratting fit, but that Nyx fit looks like it was trying to shoot someone.
Yep, and specifically if you're unfamiliar with the way that super capitals are fit and why we're saying one's a gank fit versus a ratting fit. Ratting fits, they have lots of damage, lots of bonuses to their damage application. So the fighter support units in the high slot, the excess of drone damage amplifiers in the low slots. Then of course, once you land on grid, you want to align out really quick, which is these inertial stabs. But the mid slots I think are the key for me. On a ratting super carrier, you aren't jumping in to your target system, you're already there. And so you don't need to have cap boosters. All you really need is a micro warp drive to help you align quickly, maybe a little bit of tank, and then stuff to help you lock faster, as well as stuff to help you apply damage better. So that's what shows me that this hell was a ratting fit. If we're looking at the Nyx, it has drone damage amplifiers, it has the inertial stabs, but then it has a higher focus on its warp speed, which is critical for if you're using a super carrier in hostile locations. You want a fast warp speed so that when you're warping to a safe to cloak up, you can land fast enough and cloak before somebody can combat scan you and warp their tackle on top of you. If you're warping too slow, they can, while you're still mid-warp, combat scan you and warp on grid, which is why you want to be warping as fast as possible. It's got a cloak on it for that reason, as well as the smart bombs to help clear bubbles and tackle, and those mid-slots specifically, the dual prop for aligning out and moving quickly, and cap boosters to get your cap back up after jumping in. So this one they killed with some dreadnoughts, which is different, and it looks like a little bit of an armor fleet. They had some heavy missile sacrileges, Absolution, Armageddon, definitely a bit of an armor fleet there to hold it down when they brought in the dreads, or maybe just as bonus for the dreads.
Yeah, so I asked a friend who knows these guys, and he told me that what happened was that they knew that this guy was going to drop his Nyx on basically anything, so they basically baited him into dropping and bubbled it and killed it.
Literally used his Nyx to kill a rookie ship. Granted, it was on their keep star, so that's not a good example. What else can we see? Looks like they were dropping it over in Geminate on Horde stuff. Yeah, dropping their Nyx in Geminate on a Horde Golem. Oh, good stuff. I mean, props to the Nyx pilot for being willing to drop the Nyx in such interesting situations, but good on them for hunting him down. That's what's going to happen if you're out and using your ship in a consistent way. You're going to get hunted. For the Nyx who is out hunting other people, that's a willing risk that he made. He knew that anytime he got a kill, it's going on a kill board. People can see when and where he's doing it and can try and bait him accordingly. The Hell, on the other hand, was not actively putting himself into a risky situation. He was trying to avoid as much risk as possible. And to that end, there are a bunch of different tools and systems that alliances have created over time. The most common one, which is almost ubiquitous now, is just having an intel channel where various members of the alliance or coalition will report, either by region or by group, hey, there's a hostile in this system. And if you know the ship type, what type of ship it is. And so you can track movement, see who is nearby. And it's always been a bit of an arms race in terms of how well and how quickly the intel systems of the whalers or of the whales can protect them, can notify them that danger is coming, and then they can get away, they can run, versus the whalers themselves who are trying to get in and tackle something before it can run away. So there's an arms race. Typically you'll see hyperspatial fit interdictors, hyperspatials to increase their warp speeds, they can get around quickly, hyperspatial fit Hicks as well. And even more commonly now, but not talked about as much, are blue scouts. So you'll get a scout in your target's alliance, coalition, what have you, and they'll just fly around space, typically in a explorer ship, so it seems like they have a reason to be in the various systems. And if they see something that's worth a target, they will be able to identify, this is exactly where my hunters need to go. There is no searching around. They know where their target is before they even enter the region, or log in for that matter. But if you are one of these ratters and you're trying to avoid getting hunted, there's a new tool that came out that I want to show you. It is called SMT, an Eve map tool, and it's in early stages of development. The developer isn't affiliated with TIS. I don't even know who they are, but the tool itself looks really cool and really promising. And it specifically has a feature where the code is open source, which means if you're an alliance or a coalition who doesn't have the IT infrastructure to build this yourself, but you're also security minded and you don't want another group harvesting your intel or your data for their own purposes, you can take the code and host it yourself, check and make sure that it's not a security risk, and run it as you wish. So that's really cool. But the main features of this particular tool, you've got maps, as you would expect, and some filters for those maps. It can parse intel channel reports. So like I mentioned before, one of the main ways that these whales, or even any ratter, anybody living in their space, knows what's going on is they have a channel with the rest of their alliance and their coalition who are reporting where and when hostiles are in various locations. And so it will take that data from the chat channels and pop it up on the map in a more visually notifying way. You can also track specific characters, give a bunch of information regarding ratting and ship and pod kills. And then, like I mentioned, the big thing for me, which is why I think this is actually going to be useful, is that it's open source. So if you are one of those people who is specifically security minded, you can take the code, host it yourself, and then not have to worry. And Grigorin, you had mentioned when I brought this up a couple of other tools which are in a similar boat where you have to be concerned about the data that you're using and that you're putting out there.
Yeah, I've used a few tools for DScan, like you can copy and paste your DScan results or any chat channel, usually local, into the tool, and it'll just list off everything that's in there so you don't have to scroll through it and sort through it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that a lot of people are very concerned about using anything that's hosted externally because, well, a lot of those are hosted on specific alliances services or hosted by people who are members of specific alliances, like, and so I'm sure that people in the Imperium are generally reluctant to use the one that Northern Coalition hosts, for example,
Yeah.
because I'm sure there's an expectation that whatever whoever the host is keeping logs of what people are putting through it.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye out for. It's always an interesting situation with these developer tools where the developer probably doesn't have the intention of doing that, and I would be surprised if it's being done in the majority of cases. But the fact that it's possible means that you have to be concerned when it comes to the EVE player base. And I do want to sidetrack ourselves here for a little bit, because it was brought up in the chat by Marshy, of all people, about these Intel tools, and as I mentioned before, sort of the play and counterplay between the whalers and the whales, where the whales are trying to avoid risk, minimize risk, stay as safe as possible, and when there is danger, get away. And one of the functions, one of the tools in the toolkit of the whalers in the past was called cloaky camping. So you would take your ship, it could be a tackle ship, it could just be a scout, what have you, and you would cloak them up in the system where you think the whale would be. And you just stay there, online all the time, cloaked up. And that way, if anybody came into system, they'd just report, oh, you've got Marshy in XYZ system, no visual, I can't see them. But they just always be there. And so you'd never know if you were actively being hunted or if this person was AFK, which was frustrating for a lot of players. Have my own personal opinions. I don't have time to go into them for this time being, but that was a mechanic which was removed effectively. What CCP did is they introduced mobile observatories, which you can anchor them, and after a cooldown period, they will cycle through and send out pulses of energy into space. And if it's been a while since your ship cloaked, then these pulses have a certain chance of decloaking you, which then means that the defenders can scan down your ship and kill you. So this sort of tool of using intel channels, aggregating that onto a map to give these whales a warning system for when danger is nearby, is now significantly more powerful than it used to be, because the mechanics that enabled cloaky camping have been countered by mobile observatories. So it is going to be a bit of an adjustment period. I think we're in a pretty good spot, though, seeing how there's still success with not only killing ratting supers, but also supers that are out there trying to drop on other things. You even have situations, I always go through and check on, are rorquals dying? Where are they dying? How many of them are dying? And you still see them dying everywhere. So I think that it's in an interesting spot at the moment. It's difficult to tell what portion of ships are dying relative to the portion of ships that are out there. Just the nature of EVE and the data that we have access to, we only see what dies. We don't see what's out there living and grinding ISK day after day after day. So that's going to be on CCP to make sure that ecosystem is healthy. But that is a balance that's at play here, and it was recently shifted in the favor of the whales. All right, well, I think that's a good thing to mention. I'm just going to quickly scroll through chat, make sure I have nothing else to look at. You're always listed in local, right? Even when cloaked? Yes. And that was specifically the strategy to shut down activity in the system. Grigoran, you had something to say about it?
Yeah, that specifically is one of the biggest differences between wormhole space and Pochven and nullsec. That in wormhole space and Pochven, you don't show up in local unless you say something. So you can just sit there and be there, and no one will know that you're out in space unless you're in Pochven and they run a locator agent on you, because locators still work in Pochven, but not wormhole space.
Yep, and that was one of the more annoying parts of cloaky camping. Wasn't it being, used by whalers because that was a hunting tactic. They had to use the cloaky campers because that's how they could find their targets. The more destructive, in my opinion, portion of cloaky camping was people using it as a deterrent for activity. So if you wanted to go and invade a region, or you just didn't like a particular group, then you would send or hire, depending on the circumstances, a group of cloaky campers to just go cloak up their alts in there. And even though there was a very low chance of anybody actually dying as a result of these cloaky campers, because they're always visible in local, and because hostiles visible in local reported in intel is screaming danger to anybody flying in that space, it just shuts down activity. And the reason you'd want to do this if you're going to invade is because the less activity is going on, lower the activity defense multiplier, the easier it is to attack sovereignty. You're also decreasing the income that your potential targets have, which means they're going to be easier to, or it's going to be harder for them to replace their ships. It also is a killer on morale, which, as we've seen a lot recently, is almost always the deciding factor in these wars nowadays is, do you have the morale to keep fighting? And if you've just spent a month or two unable to log in and have fun like you'd like to because your space has been cloaky camped, then you're going to be out of the war a whole lot faster than if you were able to keep enjoying the game as you wish right up until the war started.
And yeah, the other big whaling type kill recently was a vendetta that died yesterday morning in Iridia.
Yeah, and this was a different form of whaling. I wouldn't even personally call this one whaling. It's just traveling super capital hunting, most commonly taking place in low sec. Go ahead.
What this looks to me is someone who was taking a break from the game and he moved he's safe log. It looks like since he hasn't been active in a while, it looks like he's safe logged his super in low sec just in case he didn't have access to whatever structure it was docked in when he logged back in, which in this case, based on his corp history, probably would have been the 1DQ Keepstar, so it would not have been forcibly asset safetied, in which case it would have gone to Conid anyway, and that's another reason to move your supers to low sec if you're going to take a break. I do not want to know what the asset safety fee of a vendetta is.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty insane.
Yeah, and this fit doesn't look like it was being used for much, and it has a Sino fit, so it must have been more than 2 years ago that he last did anything with it.
Yeah, and that's specifically because back just after Blackout, there were changes to what ships could fit Sinos. It used to be any ship could fit a Sino. You could have a rookie ship with a Sino, which was the most common Sino ship. So it was a standard. If you were flying a capital or a super capital, you had a Sino fit to it. Now you can't have a Sino fit to it. It's got to be on the specific ship, specifically combat recons. So that's another example of why this guy was just AFK coming back to the game. And unfortunately, he was tracked down by players who all they do is look for dudes like this coming back to the game. Maybe they're traveling, but not with a move fleet. Maybe they are fraternity friend in a Nyx who's going around to different areas of space and hunting people, but he's got to get to that area of space first, and they're hunting him.
Yeah, this was White Sky, which is one of the two local hunting groups. Iridia is most known for Low Sechnaya Sholupen, but White Sky is also in the area, although they're usually a little bit next door to Iridia, and there are a lot of kills when they've worked together.
Indeed. Iridia is well known as being the most dangerous region to be flying a capital or a super capital through.
Yeah, my guess is that what happened was that they noticed whenever he went inactive that he had safe logged a vendetta, and then with a little bit of research into that character, figured out what his alts are, and then watched for those alts starting to become active again, so that they'd know to keep an eye on the system after they saw those alts becoming active again, because that has long been the general idea for how many of these low sec hunting groups operate. It's
Indeed.
basically wait patiently for stuff to happen rather than actively seeking out like what is generally understood to be whaling.
Yeah, we have a few questions coming through in chat, sort of tangentially related to what's going on here. One of them asking for Dotlan, and I'm not sure when they asked the question, so I'll just throw a link to Dotlan in the chat for you. The other one is, assuming you have all the materials ready to assemble a capital, how long is the construction? It really depends on a lot of factors. There's a lot of skills involved, and at what point in the process do you consider having all the materials? You could assemble a super capital or a capital from base minerals and PI and moon goo, which would take a whole lot longer than if you bought just all of the capital components from somebody and manufactured from there. So it depends on too many factors for me to give you a good idea. What I can say is for capitals, for the most part, if you want a capital, they would be available on the market. That's going to be the fastest way to get one. Super capitals typically in the same boat if you're in a group which produces them. So you're going to be typically in a Sov holding alliance or coalition. There's going to be a marketplace for you to buy super capitals and capitals from. If not, then you can't build one whatsoever because they can only be built in nullsec in Sov space. So you'd be limited to building caps in lowsec as an example.
Yeah, and if you want to trade super capitals, you need to do it. If you want to be docked in doing it, you need to do it in either the Sotia where it was built, which would require a Sov, or a Keepstar. And there are not many Keepstars outside of of holding alliances.
Yeah, and
I think the only free ports right now are Amamake and the Oijanen one that Fraternity owns.
indeed. And I would mention if you're buying a super capital from one of the Freeport Keepstars, you are guaranteed White Sky or some other hunting group is actively trying to kill you. So I would highly recommend against it if possible, but I mean sometimes your options are limited.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple of times when I've looked at the Hypernet and seen super carriers and Titans listed. I've seen them in NPC stations where, oh, I know that certain groups are watching those stations in particular. So if you want to buy a super in low sec, you need to be very careful about it.
Yep. So there's a lot of mechanics related to how to be caught or how to avoid getting caught, and those mechanics have changed over time. We talked about them specifically, like with the Sino that this character had fit. Other mechanics regarding jump fatigue probably changed since he left, and a whole host of different things. And if you're interested in learning more about what specifically has changed over the years because you're coming back, or even if you're a new player and you're hearing about these mechanics for the first time, I do want to recommend that you go and check out Carneros' Returning Player Reorientation. Word on the street is there's going to be a new version of this coming out soon, TM, but I do have just a link to the most recent VOD that he did last month. And it's walking through all of the big important mechanics changes that have happened in recent memory, the Sino changes being a big component of that, jump fatigue, things like that, but also a whole host of other things, which nullification, drifters, which I forget about all the time, just all sorts of cool things that he has put together, a phenomenal resource for you to go through and just have a quick overview of what they are and bear them in mind or have a refresher.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with who Carneros is, he's the leader of the Bastion. He works with talking stations. He doesn't co-host as much as he used to right now, but he's still involved. Many years ago, he used to be CCP's Zinfandel. I like him a lot. I've trash talked Imperium members a lot over the past year or so due to the war in Delve, but I've never thought of anything bad to say about him.
I don't think many people have. Alright, so that's one really cool resource if you're a new and or specifically a returning player. If you're a new player, within the last couple of years, when you spawned in your rookie system, you may have run into a very curious player and or group of players just handing out free ships to you. And they weren't affiliated with CCP, they weren't affiliated with any group in particular. It was just a wonderful gentleman by the name of Mike Azariah, who's been running this program on his own. He's currently a member of the CSM, but the program isn't related to the CSM whatsoever. He's just doing it of his own volition. And it's all done purely out of generosity. So there's no selling of the stuff. It's working off of donations and what he has in the game that he can give away to new players, which is a really cool thing to do to give our new players a kickstart, as well as someone to talk to or resources or a connection to the EVE community. EVE is a very difficult game to get into on your own, even if you have Google by your side. So having a connection to the community and a ship to kickstart you in your career is a fantastic asset. And he recently posted that they're looking to raise some more funds to continue giving stuff out during the month of November. So I'd highly recommend, if you're space rich, definitely send some ISK that way. If you're a new bro, you have uses for your ISK, so you can probably keep it to yourself. But I mean, if you're feeling generous, any amount will help. The ships that you're handing out to rookies typically aren't expensive. So if you want to, you can. But donations going to Mike Azariah, he is trusted to handle them appropriately and not be actively scamming you. So that's definitely a recommendation if you have too much ISK sitting in your wallet or just want to give back to the community or to the new crop of players who are joining the game every day.
And yeah, Mike Azariah is one of the few people who's basically universally liked in the game.
Indeed. All right. Well, that's it for player news today.
Actually, there's one more really big thing that happened since Sunday's show. It was a fight in Pochven.
It was indeed. I'm not going to go into details on that one, though, and I tell you why. Because tomorrow, on Wednesday's show, 23:59 Eve time, twitch.tv/talking stations, we're going to have Arcia, one of our hosts on the Sunday show typically, is coming in with a bunch of residents of Pochven, a whole host of them. I don't even have a full list at the moment, and they're going to be walking through a bunch of recent events and updates and quirks of Pochven, and I'm sure that they're going to go through this battle report in significantly more detail than I will. But suffice to say, capitals died to the tune of over 100 billion ISK. It was quite the event. You're going to want to find out more details because it's a really cool story, and Pochven is a really cool area of space to learn about. So definitely tune in tomorrow to hear about that. We had a question in chat about the Eve Scout public bookmarks and the spy. Did we talk about that on Sunday? I thought we did, but I'll mention it again here for anyone unfamiliar.
Oh yeah, I think we forgot to mention that on Sunday.
Eve Scout is a website run by Signal Cartel. I could have the details wrong there, but they're related. Eve Scout and Signal Cartel are often used synonymously, and they're well known for their work in Thera.
I think Eve Scout is the name of the corporation and Signal Cartel is the alliance, if I recall correctly.
Awesome. And what they've done within Thera, even before shareable bookmarks were a thing, is they had this website which would just tell you where are the different access points to Thera. And for those unfamiliar, Thera is a special kind of wormhole system. Some wouldn't consider it a wormhole, but for the sake of this discussion, that's what we'll call it. And it has some NPC stations in it, but more specifically, it has static connections. Those are connections that are always going to exist to a lot of different areas of space. So it's got a certain number that will always go to high sec, and a certain number that will always go to low sec, and a certain number that will always go to null sec, and a certain number that will always go to certain classes of wormhole space. So it is a hub of transportation within the game. And Signal Cartel does a phenomenal job and a phenomenal service to the community of making that hub accessible to everyone for minimal effort, both through this website where you can literally come in and say, okay, I am in X location. What's the closest entrance to Thera? And then once you're in Thera, you can say, okay, I want to go to Y location. What's the closest exit to get me there? It's a fantastic tool. Huge props to those guys for doing it. They've even got like a map for it so you can go and check out like, oh, where do I want to go roam today? Where do I want to go explore today, as an example. But when shareable bookmarks came out, they utilized this to make a public bookmark folder where they would scan down all of the signatures, and so you didn't even have to fit a scan probe to your ship. You could just online the bookmark folder, warp to the system, and you could warp straight to the wormhole and get wherever you needed to go. A phenomenal service. I use it all the time. Even groups who live in Thera would often just rely on Eve Scout to scan stuff for them. And what you could do, or what they did, they had a few security measures in place with the access lists. You can control who is able to utilize the bookmarks, who can warp to and from them, but then you can limit who can create and delete them. And unfortunately what happened is someone got a spy into the corporations who had access through this access list to create and delete bookmarks. And while there was the Crimson Harvest 90% loot drop event going on, they changed some of the bookmarks so that if you were warping to a bookmark that said you're warping to a high sec entrance or a high sec exit or what have you, instead you were warping right into a trap. And they were there waiting for you with tackle and with DPS to kill your ship and steal your loot. As a result, Signal Cartel had to shut down the public bookmarks until they could find a better solution to make sure that you can trust the bookmarks. And that's a big thing. Me personally, like, I'm willing to take the risk. Signal Cartel, give me back the bookmarks, please. But definitely for a lot of other members of the community, it's already a big ask to go into wormhole space where you can be bubbled, you can be tackled. If you can't even trust that the bookmark you're warping to is going to take you to a wormhole and not just a gate camp, so to speak, I can understand why they're going to be skeptical and they're going to be slow to make sure that they have a good system in place for this.
Yeah, this is why a lot of most large alliances require ESI checks so that if something like this happens, they can check who has been editing bookmarks. This is one of the things you can do if you have access to someone's ESI endpoints.
Wow, I didn't even know that. That's really cool to know.
If I recall correctly, you can keep a log of who's been recording bookmarks. You can configure certain auth sites to keep a log whenever someone's bookmarks have changed.
That's cool. So that's, and again, Signal Cartel as well, you'll notice here on the website, prominently featured are contributors, people donating ISK to, just as a thank you to them for providing this service to new players and veteran players alike. So if you have ISK left over after donating to the Magic School Bus, send it Signal Cartel's way. Although Signal Cartel, they're always accepting contributions. It seems like Magic School Bus is doing a big push right now because there's a need for it right now, so maybe make that your priority if your budget is limited. We had a question in chat, why would I share my bookmarks? Fantastic question. Eve Scout is a great example where they want to provide a service to the community, give somebody else access to Thera, and unless you have a bookmark to the wormhole, you can't get into Thera. You could scan it down yourself, but that requires you to have the skills and the modules and the ship to scan it down. Eve Scout removed that requirement, so anybody could get in and out of Thera. All they had to do was be shared this bookmark, which Eve Scout found and saved.
Yeah, with the old bookmark system, bookmarks would only be shared with your corporation if they were in corporation bookmarks. But now you can have you can have bookmarks shared to any access control list that you set up, so that anyone who's on that list, either for having standings or having a specific character, corporation, or alliance put on the list, can use those bookmarks. If a group of players are flying together, like maybe an alliance wants to share bookmarks for where they're operating, or some other group across multiple alliances is working together and needs to coordinate for operations.
Yeah, and that's one of the big changes. It sounds like you live in wormholes, the person asking this question. It might be easy to scan down a wormhole, but if you have multiple corporations or even characters living together who aren't in the same corporation, it's rather inefficient to require everybody to scan down the hole in order for everyone to roll through it. I'll give you an example of, you have a scout and they're flying around and they've scouted and they've found a location where there's a target that you want to go kill. And so you want to call all your buddies over and go kill this target that you've just found. Well, if you've shared the bookmarks with them, they can quickly just grab their ships, fly over to where you are, and kill the thing. But if you haven't shared the bookmarks, then they've got to grab a scanning ship, scan all the holes down in between you and them, bookmark it, then go reship back into their other ships and fly again. You can get around some of this by being in fleet with them and doing fleet warps and stuff like that, but it's a massive hassle. Having shared bookmarks saves time. It does create a security risk, as we've seen with Eve Scout here, but it is well worth the trade-off in 99% of cases. All right, apart from that, I think, Gregorin, are we safe to move on to game news? Are we finished with the player news? Awesome.
I think that's it.
All right, we did have just a little tiny bit of game news. There was a small patch this morning, November 2nd. It looks like just some bug fixes, things related to pirate strongholds, which have now relocated. So if you're one of the people who run that PvE, now you know if your pirate stronghold disappeared, this is why. There was a bug. They also fixed some stuff with localization issues.
Yeah, there are only a few people who really run those. The most notable is Cable Uda, who is the person who's famous for having CCP make gameplay changes to address something that he was doing on multiple occasions. Once was related to these things.
Indeed, and there are different tiers of pirate strongholds. I think you're referring specifically to the Sotios out in Nullsec.
Yes.
But there's also high-sec forward operating bases, which I think are considered pirate strongholds for this patch note as well, which are run by a whole group of players, and you could even do it solo if you have a strong enough tank on your battleship. So worth noting and keeping in mind, especially because these pirate strongholds and the mechanics surrounding them, they also involve NPC mining ships going out and mining ore and then hauling it back. It's a whole impact on the local constellation. So I'd be curious to see if some miners woke up and were very salty because they previously had the space all to themselves, and then suddenly there's some NPCs stealing their precious ore. In other patch-related news, there's going to be an extended downtime in a few hours from now on November 3rd. So keep an eye out for that. If you try to log back in around downtime, you can check out the Eve status Twitter for updates. No patch notes or dev blog on what's happening with it. It could be more bugs. It could be something more significant related to an event, if there's going to be like a Thursday event. We don't know, but we'll keep an eye on it and we'll get you informed on tomorrow's show. Or maybe the day after it. It depends on when we find out what this is about. But we'll keep you informed if there's anything interesting and worth knowing. Apart from that, in Alliance or in CCP news, the Alliance tournament is happening this weekend, and we're going to be having a phenomenal, a truly amazing show this coming Thursday on our Twitch. It's going to be live. It'll also be pushed out to YouTube and the podcast. 23:59 Eve time is when we're recording. We're going to have great guests from the Alliance tournament scene, Ithaca Hawk from the production side, as well as the Basilisk, who's a renowned Alliance tournament pilot themselves. as well as some others, and a whole host of the Talking in Stations crew will have Rain and other groups or other folks. But the Alliance tournament is just around the corner, and I did want to show off the amazing prize ships. We've talked about them previously. They look amazing. This is what's at stake within the Alliance tournament. We've got one of a kind, or 140 of a kind ships. They're very rare, very powerful, and therefore very valuable. So the pilots are hoping to snag one of these if they do well enough. But then, of course, there's pride, glory, and all that jazz, which is worth fighting for.
Yeah, isn't 140 significantly larger than the number of previous prize ships?
It is, you're right, and I'm hoping that they're going to go into a lot more detail on that change and all of the other things that have changed since the Alliance tournament has come back. It was discontinued a few years ago. This is the resurgence. It's on the comeback tour, if you will, and so it's going to be a great one. Definitely make sure you tune in to our show on Thursday, 23:59 Eve time, to hear from the experts and the insiders on everything Alliance tournament. But for the time being, we've got this dev blog, the new prize ships. You can check out the brackets, which are good to keep an eye out for, as well as the stream schedule. And I want to give you a heads up on this one. The stream is happening on Saturday and Sunday, so November 6th and November 7th, starting at 1500 and going all the way until 2200. That's 7 plus straight hours of Alliance tournament content, which is going to be amazing. This Sunday, the 7th, we are going to have our regular showtime, our regular Sunday show at 1600. So there will be Alliance tournament matches happening while we're doing our thing. We won't be angry if you're watching the AT instead. You can catch our shows later on YouTube. But next Sunday, so on the 14th, we're going to be pushing our show to record after the Alliance tournament finals have concluded so that we can enjoy that. There's probably going to be some spoilers, so definitely make sure you're tuning in, watching the Alliance tournament while it's happening live. That way you don't get anything spoiled from our show. And also, if you're tuning in live on twitch.tv/CCP, they're going to be doing the skin handouts again. So as you watch the stream on CCP's Twitch, you gain channel points over time, and you can then redeem those channel points for some exclusive Alliance tournament skins, which are really cool. So definitely tune in to watch the Alliance tournament. Also in the next week, the next 2 weeks, tune in to watch the CCP channel whenever they're live. Get those points in your bank so you can redeem them for some skins.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to see the Alliance tournament back. I actually started playing a bit after the most recent previous one, so this is the first one that I've been around for. So
right on.
Yeah, so when I first heard about Ithaca Hawk, it wasn't as an Alliance tournament person. It was as a fleet commander in AFK, which at the time was the most powerful wormhole corporation after Hard Knocks and Laserhawks.
Well, it's always a fun time. I'm a huge fan of the Alliance tournament. I had the privilege of flying in it once with Mercenary Coalition. I lost my team a match, which was fun, but that's a fantastic experience. Always worth the viewing experience, but also participating in if you do have the opportunity. Highly recommended. So it's things to keep an eye out for. Just a quick rundown. Tomorrow, huge story with Pochven. Over 100 bill worth of capitals lost, which can never be replaced, as well as a bunch of other experts and insiders from the Pochven region to give you good stuff on there. RC is going to be hosting that one. Coming up on Thursday, we're going to have Rain, Rundle, and Rich, I want to say, from the TIS crew in terms of hosting staff, as well as joined by Ithaca Hawk, the Basilisk, and maybe some other folks from the Alliance tournament scene talking about the Alliance tournament. And then just looking forward to this coming weekend, we've got the Alliance tournament itself. It's going to be live on CCP's Twitch channel, and we'll be adjusting our streaming schedule for TIS on Sunday the 14th to make sure that we have time to watch the finals with you all, and then come and join us on Talking in Stations to discuss. All right, well, thank you, Grigorin, for joining me. Thank you to our audience for joining us as well and sticking with it. This has been Talking in Stations, the Tuesday show, so to speak, for November 2nd, and we'll see you tomorrow.